Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you here to listen to a very important topic to our region, regional mobility, transportation, how we move the goods to and from the region. I want to start this out with, in your handout paper, there's an abstract, and I think it makes a lot of sense. It says the Houston Port Region petrochemical industry has invested more than $50 billion in facility upgrades over the last 4 years, with much of the increased production capacity coming online in 2018. We want to thank our friends upstream in the Shell production area that have allowed that to happen for us as they push that all downstream. But when we combine resin and chemical production along the Port of Houston trade via the Panama Canal, our container volumes have grown from over 2 million TEUs to 3 million TEUs. And with this growth comes the need for expansion in transportation infrastructure to ensure the efficient movement of products and workers. So tell us a little bit here. I have three terrific gentlemen on the panel with us. We have Rich Burns with the Port of Houston, the Chief Infrastructure Officer. Delighted to have you here. Rich's background is varied. He's a management consultant. He has 2 master's degrees from MIT. How many of you in the room can say that? A varied background, and he brings a lot of wealth of experience with the Port of Houston, and we're feeling that impact, and we appreciate that. I have James Koch. James, I want to tell you that James is with TxDOT. He was in the Houston region, and I worked with James on State Highway 146. He was instrumental in helping us understand how that machine of TxDOT works, and Transportation Planning Commission, how we got up through. Very thankful for that. We're glad to have you back in the region, and we're very excited to see the future, what we'll do with the Houston region. And Brian with Jetco Delivery. Brian also has a unique perspective in understanding the culture in small businesses, and I really am glad to have him up here to help us understand the trucking operations and how that affects these workers that we have today. But Rich, I want to start out with you here. We started out really, it's been about several years ago when the port was at 1.5 million TEUs, and at that time we felt like we were kind of behind the ball. Since then, the transportation panel here at Economic Alliance has gotten involved in a number of projects. Let me read you this off to you. We currently have 28 projects on our freight mobility priority list. The key ones are being Highway 225 redevelopment, Highway 146 through La Porte, the Barber's Cut connectivity at State Highway 146, segments H and I of the Grand Parkway, and FM 569 State Highway 146 to 99. And also a big one that I know you're going to tell us a little bit about is Port Road. The Port Road expansion has no less than 14 projects going on that one stretch of road. Tell us a little bit about the Port of Houston, how we are today compared to where we were several years ago, and where we need to go in the future.
Sure, and thank you, Glenn, for having me, and thank you to Chad for inviting me to be part of this panel. The work with the Economic Alliance, Chad and his team, and TAG and other entities to put together that list of 28 priority projects is, I'll just say, there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of partnership and a lot of stakeholders that have to be involved. And that's the story across all of the port. So the way we look at it from an infrastructure standpoint is we want to provide infrastructure to meet demand across the entire value chain of all the users. So that starts with the ship channel. I know the lunch keynote is going to be our chairman, Rick Campo, talking about the ship channel, so I won't belabor that too much. But I will say that that's a great example of partnership where community, the manufacturers, the industry, the Corps of Engineers, and the port have to work together. One aspect that we won't talk about in terms of the ship channel improvement project is ship channel maintenance. And days like today when it's raining really remind us of what happens when the bayous fill up and they bring siltation into the channel, and that doesn't help anybody who's moving cargo in and out of the port. So we do need to put our effort around getting the money that is put into the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and put that back into maintenance to remove the silt that comes in on the water side do some advanced maintenance, and get those appropriations into the core budget to do so. We're also working on the land side with the Chief Resiliency Officer at the City of Houston, as well as the Harris County Flood Control District, to think about how we can reimagine some of the flood control projects where they can actually capture and control some of that sediment from getting into the channel in the first place. So the channel, we'll talk about that further later on in the day. On the road side, those 28 projects are really, really important, and they include all the ones you named. Also, thinking about the northeast segment of the Grand Parkway, for example, 610, connectors to Beltway 8, connectors to 225, and some projects that may not even be on TxDOT's list yet. You asked about Port Road. We do have an improvement project to widen Port Road. Imagine that we were at 1.5 million TEUs just a short while ago, and now we're pushing 3 million this year. When we go to 4 million and 5 million, today we have 10,000 transactions a day. You know, that's about 6,000, 7,000 trucks. So when that is 10,000 trucks or 12,000 trucks, they have to get in and out of the port, and they also have to move around the highways. It doesn't help anybody for a container of resins to or a container of imports to get off a ship onto a truck and have that truck get stuck in traffic. So again, there's a theme of working together. I talked about the channel, working with the core and industry. On the land side, the road side, we have to work with TxDOT, Harris County, HGAC to make sure that there are funding and approvals and permits for these kinds of projects. The Port Road is a case in point. There are multiple, we've got, you know, all the entities I've named, plus the local cities, who all have something to say about it. There's a lot of growth at Bayport with expansions of the INEOS plant. There's some new cargoes coming in at our RoRo facility. There's a lot of different entities that want to move trucks, not just in and out of the port, but in and out of the plants there. So we are working with we have a cross-functional working group, which is in part facilitated by, you know, our friends here at the Economic Alliance, to make sure that everybody is aware of all the moving parts so that we can move these projects going forward. That project in particular is also funded in part by state funds, and so there's another moving part, and we thank you know, that for making the project happen.
And two, I want to remind the audience we do have a program called Slido. You can do it, an app on your phone, or go to a website, slido.com, enter # GCIF 2019. This gives you a chance to ask questions of our panelists here throughout this whole conference. I encourage you to do so. James, I came to you on bended knee to beg for your help with 146. We've done a lot of work there, a lot of good. Tell us how TxDOT envisions this part of the Houston region and what your plans are going forward to help us move freight.
Okay, thanks a lot. And I would like to put in a safety moment with TxDOT. Safety is our number one priority concern. Please travel safe on your way home. I will tell you, my brothers and sisters at TxDOT initiated 12-hour shifts starting at 8 hours this morning to make sure that folks are moving around the region safely. So I've had the privilege of working one of those shifts a couple times, and you know, if you ever get a chance to thank those guys, give them a thanks. But talking about our region and this area in particular, obviously, this is a huge economic engine for the state. It's very critical for our region and for TxDOT in general. We are doing some studies in this area we're doing what's called a PEL, which is basically a preliminary environmental look at projects on the State Highway 225 corridor, and that extends basically from 610 all the way to 146. And we take that study up to pick up the Ship Channel Bridge area on the west end, and on the east end we're going down to Barber's Cut to look at connectivity on that stretch as well. Where we are in that study right now, we're working with a consultant partner on developing a scope, make sure that we've got everything in that scope that we need looked at, included in that scope, and hope to have them engaged before the end of the year. These studies, typically it takes about a year to do data gathering, and then that's phase one, and then phase two is actually developing alternatives and options and things like that. That part of the process takes about a year and a half to 2 years. You'll see public meetings, and we encourage folks to participate in those meetings. We'll have stakeholder groups, and obviously a lot of people in this room will probably be part of those stakeholder groups, and we encourage that participation. I will also mention HJC is doing a study looking at the roads that connect with 225 as well. And their study area basically goes from 610 to 146, and then from the ship channel down to Red Bluff. So that's kind of, that information will help our study kind of pull everything together, so we're understanding how people in freight are moving in this area. On 146, we've got some intersection improvements coming up. That project's going to let in May of 2020. That will provide some additional turn lanes and some new signals at that location to help traffic move better through that intersection. Our traffic guys are also looking at, can we make some interim signal improvements along that corridor now to see if we can improve things before that job goes to construction. And then the port has also asked us to look at providing direct connectors there to Barber's Cut, so we're looking at that as well. As mentioned before, the Grand Parkway is under construction right now, and we've had pretty favorable weather on that project. Things are moving along really well there. We've got, I think, a spring 2022 final opening is what they're targeting right now on that part of the world. I will also mention we've got some repair work that we need to be done on the 610 Ship Channel Bridge coming up. That project is listed to go to letting in November. The construction work will probably start the last week of December or early January, and probably go till about mid-year, about July. There will be full closures at times on that facility, and we understand the needs to move that project along. So we are offering incentives, a pretty healthy incentive clause on that project as it moves along. But we're doing what we can for the region. So.
Thank you very much, James. Brian, tell us a little bit about what's happening with truck drivers today, the business, the industry. All kinds of things are coming at you guys, from Uber to you name it. Tell us what's going on there.
Every day is a new challenge. But let me go over maybe just kind of a quick bullet point state of the industry generally, and some of the trends and issues that maybe have our attention right now. If you look at 2019 and trucking generally, it's slower than 2018, back half of 2017. Not making any comments about port specific or any niches, but as a whole, the trucking industry is a little bit slower, and I think it's probably just catching its breath. So I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from the peaks or valleys of our industry. A year ago, people were talking about the driver shortage and that we're never going to see, we're not going to have enough trucks ever, and today people are saying, well, there is no driver shortage. And I think that's both kind of wrong. I think that instead of looking at the peaks and valleys, you need to look at kind of the trends. And the trends would tell you that if we don't do something as a society, there will be a driver shortage. It's very hard, even today, with things a little slower, to hire good drivers. And as an industry, we're not attracting drivers fast enough, especially when you consider the fact that the average age of a professional truck driver is about 54, 55. We're as an industry, we're losing drivers to retirement. And so we have to bring in new people. And that's a function, I think, of obviously pay It's a function of treatment and respect. And as an employer, we can only do so much when it comes to that. We need to be sure that we're respecting drivers at loading facilities, on the road. Best way we can respect professional drivers on the road is to be sure that our cell phones are packed away nicely and that we're eliminating distractions. You can't stop a truck the way that you can stop a car. I think the key word in our industry right now is optimize. A lot of trucking companies are looking at how do we optimize, right? We're not going to win this war with just looking at rates. So what we're focused on is dwell time. I mean, dwell time, whether it's at a port or whether it's a loading site, it's a killer. Sure, you can charge waiting time. That doesn't compensate you for what you really make money on, which is rolling, which is driving. So we're really trying to focus on improved efficiency, better collaboration between truckers, shippers, the port. We talk about infrastructure, and the comments today about infrastructure are critical. And this is our office. The roads are our office, and kind of the old talk of no new taxes isn't practical. We need to talk about investment, whether it's the ship channel expansion, roads, rail, multimodal. But we need to focus heavily on waste. But waste and investment are different. President Eisenhower built the interstate. And that's sort of the mentality I think we have to have going forward, especially in a community as vibrant as Houston, and a community that has so much growth ahead of it. Without the infrastructure, which includes everything, roads, rail, most importantly, the human component, we've got to invest. And part of that, though, is that's not going to happen overnight. So when I talk about optimize, what I'm talking about is using the infrastructure that we do have. A couple of years ago, the legislature, I think, took a good first step to allow increased container weights so that we could haul basically more cargo with fewer trucks. I think there's some practicality issues with the law that was passed, and I'm hoping that over the coming sessions there will be review of that to allow more of that to happen, because at the end of the day you can do it safely if you do it right, and you can use more of the infrastructure by hauling more cargo. And the Port of Houston was a leader in increasing port hours, right? And that didn't work because people didn't show up. And so I think as we grow, and this community is going to grow faster than the infrastructure investment may allow. Let's look at running when more people are home. Let's look at not being in rush hour. But to do that, the port can't do it alone. Truckers, shippers, everybody has to be prepared to adjust their hours to use the infrastructure more than like on an 8 to 5 or a 7 to 5 basis. So the things that I think we need to be looking at as a supply chain and as a business community is how do we optimize what we have while we're paving the way for structural growth.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I am going to slip to some questions. They're lighting up the screen. Thank you very much. Looks like one of our top questions has a little bit out of our current region, but it's very important. Could you give us an update on the proposed rail connection between Freeport and Rosenberg? Anyone care to answer that? Have knowledge of that?
Is it a dot question?
It's a little out of our region, but
It's a little bit out of our region. I think that the Port of Freeport's been advocating for that connection for a long time. And just like anything with ports and railroads, it takes a partnership between the railroads. If the railroads don't want it, it's not going to happen. If the port can put the funding up, then great. But the cargo and the railroads and the port have to be in sync. So I won't comment more about that specific project. But in general, we could be moving more freight on rail around the state. We have a yard at Barber's Cut, which is underutilized, and we work with the UP and the BNSF and the KCS to see about maximizing the amount of traffic that can come through the port and onto rail and into the hinterland, because what that does is it expands the economic impact of places like Houston to the region.
And Glenn, I'd like to add, in my previous tour of duty with TxDOT, this was a project that was brought up, and there's multiple things that they're looking at. One of the ideas is another facility on the west side of town to bring that traffic, the freight traffic, north and on the west side of town rather than having it go through the core. There is a freight yard down there on US 59, and they can get the freight over there, get it loaded up on trucks on 59. But then where are they going, and where's the best place? And that's where forums such as this is understanding the industry, understanding the needs. It's not just building a facility. It's having these conversations, and are we putting the lanes and things where they need to be to help safely move folks around. So it's a good conversation.
I think that what happens is the cargo will find the most economic way to travel, whether that's truck, rail, and so, if you look at a very common container lane, let's say Port Houston to Dallas, right? I mean, shippers are going to look at, okay, how long does it take me to get that container to Dallas? How many days is it on truck? How many days is it on rail? What's the cost? And how many times is it being handled? So the economics drive the behavior a lot, and I think from a public policy standpoint, the operative word is still multimodal. We need truck, rail, barge. We need all of it. But ultimately, Glenn, the decisions really come down to economics, and they're shipper driven, and those economics change. In other words, a year ago, when truck rates were through the roof, rail, I think, benefited from that. And now the truck rates are lower, it's back to being more competitive with rail. So the market keeps shifting, and ultimately that math, transit times, and cost will drive behavior more than anything.
I understand. I want to. One of the things we did recently at the Alliance was form that Port Road expansion project group, and we were a little bit brave on that. We decided we would bring all of these various interests with various economic interests, timetables, into one room and become, for better or worse, the chief complaint box, if you will. We wanted to be the wheelhouse for all the issues. I'm finding that's taking root. It seems to be another good root-based community involvement on how we facilitate industry with municipalities. How is that? How are these type of projects working when you get these type of involvement from the Economic Alliance and other groups? How does that drive this bus?
So I'll just put it very simply. Communication early helps projects, especially big, important projects, move faster. Because what you don't want to do is get down the road, pun intended, and have some resistance or some yellow or a red flag come up later when you could have planned for it earlier. So putting the people around a table and understanding what all the stakeholder interests are, and then fully informing the stakeholders that there will be impacts, then that only allows the group of everybody to get behind a project like that, because they see the benefits, they also see the impacts, and they see them coming so they can plan for them.
Hats off to the engineers in the room. I'm impressed with whatever engineers do. It absolutely impresses me. Let's see. Let's get another question here. This was something someone passed a little bit earlier. Maybe it's top one here. Driverless trucks. We talked a little bit about that automation. This affects all three of you at different degrees. We had the freight shuttle discussion at one time. We have autonomous driving automobiles for commuter. Now Uber Freight is a hot dot. Tell us a little bit about how we technology to address these issues.
Yeah, I mean, look, when it comes to driverless trucks, truly no human being in the truck, I don't see it. I've talked for 20 years. Down the road, sure, of course it's going to happen. But near term, that's about as exciting as getting on a plane with no pilot, even though we know the technology does more of the flying. So the technology in trucks that's really got my interest is safety technology. There's technology that's preventing rollovers. There's technology that's alerting drivers if they're drifting lanes. The ergonomics in trucks is a lot better. In fact, I see technology as a way to bring the next generation into trucks, not a way to get them out of trucks. So it's a situation really where the technology's there. There's no question. But are we ready for it? Are you ready to have a truck? Is society ready to have a truck with no human being in it next to your car on the highway? I don't think so. When we're prepared to invest in driverless lanes, in other words, automated truck routes, that could be very interesting. So I'm not trying to say, well, forget about it, it's not happening. But if I'm worried about the next 20 years, that's just not on my list. What's on my list is how technology, fuel efficiency, cleaner burning, safety, how all that is coming together to make the truck driving experience better and to make us even more responsible members of the communities that we serve. So without driverless lanes, I'm just not. We'll talk in 2040, in my guess.
So driverless lanes.
Okay. Well, let me just, from TxDOT's perspective, my personal perspective on this, there's a couple things that are being discussed right now. One is driverless, or automated vehicles. There's also connected vehicles. And I've personally seen demonstrations of trucks that were actually connected together where the front truck basically was leading the train. So this technology is out there and it is functioning. Now, how do we best, bring that technology, into our facilities? To me, it's kind of intriguing because you can basically link trucks together as a train and send them to on a facility and going across the state or across the country. Same thing with automated vehicles. We are right now installing equipment in pilot locations around the state and around the country, actually, that's starting this first conversation of the infrastructure talking to the vehicles. So when you pull up to a signal, in the box there at that signal, it's talking back and forth to the cars. Not all the cars obviously can read that information now, but ultimately what that's going to be able to do is signal to the car. That signal will know where your vehicle's going, and it will put you in the right lane to make those maneuvers. The other intriguing thing about this whole conversation is what the vehicles will look like in the future. Will we own our own vehicles? All the major manufacturers are looking at manufacturing the vehicles. So will you even own a vehicle in the future? And if that happens, to me, things such as making modular vehicles that could fit within smaller footprints, that will greatly expand the capacity that we have on our facilities right now. You could make 2 lanes right now into perhaps 3 lanes. So you're increasing capacity without building anything else. So to me, I think the future is really bright. It is a ways down the road before we get to see some of these things. But what I'm trying to do on my end is prepare our, what I call real estate, what we're putting on the ground today and how that could possibly adapt to this future technology.
With 225 would be included in that Pell study? There you go. Rich.
So I would just echo the points about the practical realities of driverless trucks. On the roads, maybe someday. Inside the port area, every port is configured differently. The way Bayport and Barbers Cut work with 10,000 transactions a day, you need eyes and ears inside the trucks and inside the yard mules to make sure that we are operating in a safe manner with high service levels. And that's what we have today. We have industry nationally leading service levels. And so trucks come in, they come out in a minimum amount of time. What we are focused on are looking at real practical new technologies. So as an example, electric yard mules, which can reduce emissions, new safety equipment, which can minimize the chance of collisions in the yard and that type of thing, as well as we're making investments in things like a new expanded gate at Barber's Cut to make sure that those trucks, if they're not waiting today, we don't want them waiting tomorrow. So we're expanding that gate today.
Yeah, that's very forward thinking. We also have a question here about the southeast side of Grand Parkway. James, I know that was the segments that were recently in the news, and thank you very much. We're to our commission for approving that. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I want to thank everybody who took the time to make comments or travel to Austin and provide comments. I used to work in the Transportation Planning and Programming Division with TxDOT in Austin. That's the TxDOT division that's responsible for what they call that 10-year UTP document that everybody was all concerned with, and you know, if we, you know, on a good day, we'd have like 3 or 4 people show up or provide comments. And in this region, there was over 600 comments specific to the Grand Parkway. So thank you all for taking the time and understanding, you know, the importance of that facility to our region and keeping it on that document, because that does keep it moving forward. And where we are right now is the initial part of that process is called doing a traffic and revenue study to see, you know, how much traffic would be generated by a new facility and potentially how much revenue it could develop over time. And so we're kicking off those studies. That's where we are right now. So thanks again, everybody.
I keep looking for George Jetson as I shoot down 225 one day. We'll see. Reminder, slido.com, #GCIF 2019. If you have any questions, one did cross here, and I didn't know if you saw that. I'm not sure how we answered that one, but it had to do with the protesters recently that were on the Hartman Bridge. How do we keep that from happening in the future to shut down industry for a day?
Well, that's probably closest to our business than others, but you know, that's a security issue. There are communities like the Lone Star Harbor Safety Committee. There are safety districts that involve the Coast Guard, the port, the pilots, the different entities, Customs and Border Patrol, that work together, and there are plans in place, right? It's not like no one is thinking about bad things that can happen in the ship channel. Now, 11 people dangling themselves from steel wire on the Fred Hartman Bridge. That was a bit of a surprise, but I think that the authorities that were involved took care of that quite expeditiously and safely. So I'm actually proud of the way it was handled. The pilots had a backup of ships. Normally they move something like 60 ships a day, and they had a big peak the next day because of all the ships that were backed up. They had to close the ship channel on either side of that bridge, and they handled that as if it was a normal day, right? They put the number of people that needed to move the commerce back out and forth, and so while free speech is important in this country, and we respect that. It did disrupt commerce, and it was recovered in probably the best way. You know, there were no fatalities, or actually there was an accident that they caused, and that was bad news. And our hearts go out to those folks that were impacted. But everybody involved, from the pilots to the Coast Guard to our own fire and safety crews at the port, were involved, and the police. I'm pretty proud of what they did to handle the situation.
Thank you very much. I think we all are. So I want to, so many questions come to mind up here when I have you three, but one of the things I'm curious about is the amount of ship traffic. The pilots could probably answer this better, but you may know, Rich. The total volume, barge, everything. What is the delta between the Houston port region, which we know is a top, versus, say, Long Beach or New Jersey?
So that's a good softball question for me, because I know the answer to that one. We have about 10,000 ships that come in and out every year. That means 10 in, 10 out, 20,000 total transits. Some of them shift between facilities to offload and load, specialty chemicals and that type of thing. So it's a tremendous amount. Add to that 220,000 barge moves a year. So divide that by 365, and it's a lot. Comparing that to New York, New Jersey, and Long Beach, LA, the 10,000 is more than all 4 of those ports combined.
That's pretty big delta.
Yeah.
And so what do you, from the port's perspective on transportation infrastructure, I have a tendency to focus outside the gate, my nature, TxDOT, Brian, but what are the current challenges beyond the gate? Where do we go? Is it shipping? Is it the waterways? Is it rail? Is it road? What do you think is the best?
Well, I don't think it's any secret to people in this room that the biggest challenge that we're addressing right now is the expansion of the ship channel. Widening and deepening is important. It's a $1 billion project. It has to be a partnership with industry as well as the Corps of Engineers, and we have a great relationship with both right now. And it also involves community, because community needs to advocate for widening the ship channel. The ship channel is probably the most important piece of infrastructure in the country, and some say in the world, even more important than the Straits of Hormuz, because of the potential for the movement in and out of goods, including the energy expansion. The shale revolution is happening. It's a lower for longer feedstock of gas that's fueling the petrochemical revolution. It's exports of crude, it's exports of NGLs. And so that's the number one challenge. Now, on the other side of that, there are pipelines that have to be built, and the port actually supports the energy industry by licensing many of those pipelines where they involve the ship channel. It's the road projects that we talked about. It's rail debottlenecking. We just finished a debottlenecking project at Broadway, which is near the turning basin area of the port, which brought benefits to the local communities. Kids aren't waiting for their parents to pick them up at school because they're behind a train now. So those delays are reduced. And so it's an ecosystem of community, industry, and I'm a broken record, but it is everybody working together.
Yeah, I share that broken record. I agree with that 100%. We have a few minutes left here. Is there anything that you would like to pass on to this audience that the 3 of you would like to express before we finish up?
First of all, there's a lot of audience that doesn't know what a broker record is. Look, I just want to, come back to making sure that we, as a group, are focused on the human element. I mean, technology is important. Infrastructure, investment in infrastructure is critically important. I don't see a day where, again, for a long time, where we don't need drivers, we don't need skilled professionals, skilled labor. So let's make sure that there's always appropriate respect for the front lines in all of our industries. And we began today's session, the first session, talking about OSHA recordables and how we benchmark. And when it comes to safety, just a couple of things I'd like to make sure we walk away with. First of all, good can be bad. So we're doing well, but we can do better. The other thing is that when something is an OSHA recordable or a DOT recordable, it's only because certain criteria were met. So I think we have to have our focus on all injuries, all accidents, near misses, so that we can prevent the big ones. And our companies, our organizations, our departments are whispering to us, and we've got to be always listening to the whispers and trying to practice, and trying to get ahead of the recordable. Because we don't really want to be good at cleaning up the mess. We as a community want to be good at prevention. And you don't do that as well with rear view looking data. We've got to focus on the behaviors that drive safety. And that's really a call to action, so that we don't have any more of the things that we saw in this community earlier this year.
Thank you very much. And last year, James, we had Quincy up here, Quincy Allen, and I told Quincy that I've been doing an informal poll research I've been visiting all the windshield repair guys in the area to see where the major road project damage is. And I'm proud to announce this year that discussion has dropped way, way down. I haven't had to replace a windshield. I'm in good shape. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I will tell you, one of the keys, I think you had mentioned it before, with drivers and getting more drivers on the road and getting them into that industry. We're having a similar issue with surveyors. A lot of the surveyors out there are getting older, and we're not seeing an influx of young people interested in doing survey work. Well, that's the front door of what I need to move these projects along. So some of this discussion and communication is identifying what those needs are, what those weak links are in our system, and moving those forward so that we can get folks in those industries to move forward. So, and like I said, it's all about communication. I can't help you with your issue if I don't know about it and I don't understand it. So communication is very key. Thanks, sir.
Very good. Thank you all very much. Rich, you have any final comment?
Yeah, just when I get a final comment question, I go back to first principles. And the first principle of the port is our mission statement, which is to drive regional prosperity. And that's a mouthful when you really want to talk about whether that's jobs or commerce or investment or stewarding the public resources or our environmental leadership policy and so forth. But at the end of the day, the reason we were put in place was to be the local sponsor of the ship channel, and then by extension, everything that ship channel benefits, which are the public docks, the private facilities, and we take that job very, very seriously, and we're open to more and more conversations. So my call to action is, A, support the ship channel, support the freight projects on the roads, and come talk to us if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We appreciate having you here today. Thank you all very much.